is creative workers and professionals generally prefer to live in a cosmopolitan community. That is, communities where harassment is not tolerated and where gender nonconformity is protected. Another key reason is this. When a city chooses to invest its tax money and its mental energy into policing citizens' gender identities, that community has less tax money and less energy left over with which to build a healthy business climate and grow the economy. So my question to Mr. Enos, for starters, is this. In a time of very deep economic uncertainty, why should the city reject a protocol that helps us grow our economy?
Mr. Enos?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about economical terms. I didn't come here in economical terms today. I came here on behalf of my wife, my daughter, my granddaughters. Their right to be free of invasion of their intimate privacy. So on economic terms, I don't have a comment.
And that's fine, Madam Chair. My next question is inspired by a consistent piece of feedback that I've heard over the past year from our local transgender community through the consultation process that we've been on in order to develop the transgender protocol. Consistently, trans citizens have told me that in their conception, this debate is not about washrooms or change rooms at all. Rather, this debate is about the right of transgender people to exist in public.
Again, I understand this is a very emotional debate, but we have 40 people who are going to be making presentations today, and we need to respect all delegates. Councillor, through the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The right to exist in public is on my mind because the City of Hamilton is in the business of providing useful public space. Whether it's the Brayley Health Centre across the road providing health services, whether it's the McNabb bus terminal providing transit, or whether it's our city pools, transgender people simply do have a right to equal access. However, before we can even think about a right to equal access, we have to acknowledge that there is such a thing as transgender. There are such people. So this is my second question. Does Mr. Enos acknowledge the existence of transgender people?
I certainly do. I had a friend who lived 10 years, a male who lived 10 years as a woman, until his recent passing. A good friend of mine. We spent much time together. I thought no less him a person than any other of my friends. So the answer is yes.
And I don't know
through the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm glad to know that Mr. Enos has had some lived experience with transgender people. I do not know the preferred pronouns of his friend. However, I'm glad that Mr. Enos had this friend. In light of this friendship, I'm dismayed that Mr. Enos would not want to protect a right to equal access. My final question, Madam Chair, is about violence. We know, Madam Chair, that transgender people, and particularly transgender women and transgender youth, face disproportionate emotional, physical, and sexual violence. And we know that transgender people, particularly including transgender women and transgender youth, make up a disproportionate number of suicide cases. The roots of violence are complex. The roots of transphobia and transmisogyny are very complex, and I don't have time to unpack them all today. But what I do know is this. The City of Hamilton has a moral obligation to never have any practices that communicate to vulnerable citizens, particularly including our transgender women and men and youth, that the violence that they face in society is in any way not inappropriate. Madam Chair, this brings me to my final question to Mr. Enos. Why should the City of Hamilton reject a protocol that helps us to decrease violence against some of our most vulnerable citizens? Why?
Well, that's a fair question. I certainly don't condone violence. You'll never ever heard me speaking up for violence or writing for violence. I'm not convinced the protocol reduces violence. When we look at the situation, men and women for many, many years have been required to use facilities matching their birth gender. And there was nothing violent about that, and there was nothing hateful about that. It was a matter of respecting a female's need for intimate privacy in intimate facilities. So I don't tie asking or sticking to the law, the exemption that is in place. The law says that it's not a human right to use a gender-specific facility as long as it's based on the grounds of public decency, which is exactly what I'm presenting today. So I don't tie this protocol to reducing violence.
Madam Chair, that is clear. My interpretation of the law differs significantly from Mr. Enos's, and the moral and legal arguments I know are going to be made very ably today by our diverse delegations. So I'm going to turn the floor over to them after one final word, which is this. As I think about this debate, I'm reminded of Janet Mock's speech at the March on Washington, the Women's March, on January the 21st. This is I hear Councillor Whitehead murmuring. This is a thought inspired by Mr. Enos's delegation, with which I would like to close my final comment. As you may know, Madam Chair, Janet Mock is a leader both in the Black community and the transgender community, and she is a trans woman. In her speech at the March on Washington, she said, quote, "Of the principle of feminism, it requires us to defend one another when it is difficult and dangerous. It requires us to truly see ourselves and one another," unquote. So, to the transgender and non-binary and two-spirit delegations who have come forward today, given that our public spaces are sometimes dangerous and difficult, thank you for defending the moral integrity of Hamilton. Thank you for defending our city.
Thank you,
I'm looking
Councillor.
forward to your delegations.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Are there any other, Mr. Enos, are there any other questions for the Mr. Mayor? Did you have a?
No, I don't, but I do want to kind of rain on my friend here with a point of order. So just to be fair, you know, I know Aidan's got a lot of passion for this, as we all do, and I appreciate he wants to get a lot of information out, but I don't think it's particularly fair that we have kind of an ongoing debate with the presenters that are going to be here, because then, for two reasons. One, we're going to be here forever, and there is a debate to be had when the item is actually before us legitimately. So this is delegation time, and Aidan, but with all due respect, I don't want to, maybe I'm the right guy to do this, but I don't think we should treat all of our delegates in the way that that we just did. And we could save all of our kind of debating points for when we get to item 8.1 on the agenda. So if we could follow that rule, Madam Chair, that would be very helpful.
I agree. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Green, or Councillor Green?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Mayor. Through you to Mr. Enos. Mr. Enos, should this pass today, what would be your next steps of action?
No, I don't make specific plans. I deal with things as they come up. So that's my honest answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Are there any further questions for the presenter? If not, thank you, Mr. Enos.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
The next